Have you ever stopped to consider that perhaps it's not you who controls your choices, but rather an invisible pattern that silently guides everything? Carl Jung discovered that there are four main ways of seeing the world, and that each person, without realizing it, is trapped in one of them. The curious thing is that this imprisonment isn't revealed in the obvious. It appears in the details, in the way you make decisions, in the conflicts you recur, even in the way you relate to yourself. And here's the controversy. What you call personality may be nothing more than a persona, a mask the ego has constructed to survive. While you believe you're free, you may actually just be following the same internal script, as if manipulated by archetypes you never consciously chose. And this is precisely where practical spirituality comes in. When you understand your type, you begin to also perceive the shadow it carries. Now imagine the impact of this, discovering why certain things drain your energy, why some people seem to speak your language and others can never understand you. Jung asserted that self-knowledge is not a luxury, it is psychic survival. And if you learn to decipher your type map, you not only free yourself from the persona, but find the true path to your essence. So I ask you, do you truly know who you are? The personality map. Imagine that each person carries within them an invisible map, a secret design that guides their steps, their choices, and even their stumbles. This map isn't written on paper, but in symbols, patterns, and experiences that shape each person's essence. Carl Jung called this structure something that goes far beyond superficial labels. It's a true cartography of the soul, where the ego, the persona, and even archetypes play crucial roles. The curious thing is that most people never learn to read their own map, living like a lost traveler walking without a compass. But when a person begins to explore spirituality and dabble in shadow work, this map begins to illuminate, revealing secret passages that previously seemed just walls. It's fascinating to see how this personality map isn't a prison, but an invitation. It shows limits, yes, but it also points to paths the individual can follow to expand beyond what they thought possible. Consider someone who has always considered themselves shy and withdrawn. In the map, this mark may appear as introversion, but if the person learns to integrate their shadow, they discover that they can also be profoundly magnetic in intimate and profound conversations. Likewise, someone who has always believed themselves to be too rational may find deep within their own map clear signs of a dormant intuition waiting to blossom. The map doesn't define the destination, but reveals the hidden paths that connect the ego to the self. If this map were a game, the archetypes would be the pieces, the persona the board, and shadow work the necessary movement to break out of stagnation. It's as if the universe has left clues in dreams, synchronicities, and even daily conflicts, waiting for someone to dare to decipher them. Reading this map requires courage because it often shows us territories we avoid, such as anger, fear, or insecurity. But this is precisely where the key to individuation lies, traversing these dark territories to find the clearing. And curiously, it is at the next point on this path that Jung offers us one of the first forks in this map: extraversion and introversion. Extraversion versus introversion. Carl Jung was one of the first to show that extraversion and introversion are not rigid labels, but rather ways of directing psychic energy. While the extrovert projects their gaze outward, seeking nourishment in contact with people, experiences, and novelty, the introvert turns inward, finding nourishment in silence, reflection, and their own spirituality. It's not about being sociable or antisocial, but about the direction of the life force that runs through the ego. Many confuse introversion with shyness, but they are not the same. An introvert can have a charismatic persona in small groups, while a shy person feels blocked even by the gaze of others. And similarly, an extrovert can shine in crowds, but feel lost when faced with their own shadow. The beauty of this duality is that neither type is better. Both carry potential and pitfalls. The extrovert, for example, can get lost in the incessant pursuit of external stimuli, becoming a hostage to the approval of others, an ego thirsty for applause that forgets to nourish itself internally. The introvert, on the other hand, runs the risk of immersing themselves so deeply in their own world that they end up building walls, confusing protection with isolation. This is where shadow work comes in. For the extrovert, the challenge is to stop running away from themselves. For the introvert, it's learning to open up to the world without losing their essence. Think of a conversation circle. The extrovert holds the collective energy, but needs to learn to listen. The introvert absorbs it in silence, but needs to dare to express themselves. This clash between inside and outside is like breathing, inhaling and exhaling, withdrawing and expanding. True individuation emerges when a person learns to balance these movements, recognizing that deep down, each of us has a bit of both. The introvert can learn to shine without losing depth. The extrovert can discover the strength to stop, look within, and embrace silence. Jung's personality map shows us that after understanding this initial polarity, there are other, even more complex dimensions to explore. And the next step in this journey leads us to something that often guides our decisions without us realizing it: the function of thought. Thought among the four functions. Carl Jung described thought is like a compass that organizes chaos, giving structure and logic to what seems scattered. It's the filter that asks, does this make sense, before accepting any idea. People with a predominance of this function tend to value clarity, objectivity, and coherence, as if the world needed to fit within an equation the ego could understand. But there's a curious detail. When thought dominates without balance, it becomes a prison, a rigid persona that believes reasoning alone is enough. It's like trying to explain love with mathematical formulas. Logic may describe some movements, but it doesn't capture the depth of the experience. In everyday life, those who rely on this function often excel in fields such as law, engineering, science, or any field where analysis and argumentation are essential. Imagine a lawyer who constructs his defense like a perfect puzzle, or a scientist who spends sleepless nights searching for the exact formula. Thought gives the power of clarity, but it can also distance one from the heart if it is not balanced. Shadow work, in this case, involves recognizing that not everything can be controlled by the rational mind. A practical situation. A thinker can exercise balance by reading not only technical treatises, but also literature, poetry, and spirituality. Works that invite the ego to release control and allow itself to be affected by archetypes and symbols that escape reason. Here's the paradox. Thought gives us the foundation for building solid bridges, but used alone, it prevents us from crossing them. Individuation requires that those who think learn to feel, to trust, to intuit. Therefore, Jung never presented the functions as isolated boxes, but as forces in constant dialogue. An ego centered solely on thought can become an internal tyrant, incapable of seeing that logic does not answer the soul's anguish. When the thinker dares to open space for vulnerability, they discover that their reasoning does not lose strength, but rather gains depth. And this is precisely where the next function enters, bringing what thought alone cannot offer. Feeling as a measure of value. Feeling, if thought asks, does this make sense? Feeling asks, does this have value? Carl Jung said that feeling is not synonymous with emotion, but a psychic function that evaluates, weighs, and gives meaning to experiences. While the rational ego organizes facts, it is feeling that decides whether something matters or not in life. A person guided by feeling may even listen to impeccable arguments, but if something doesn't resonate within them, it will be difficult to convince them. It's like choosing between two jobs, one with a great salary, but that drains the soul, and another more modest, but aligned with their spirituality and essence. Thought would make calculations, but feeling would reveal which path truly nourishes. In practice, individuals guided by this function often possess a sensitivity that goes beyond words. They can shine in human relations, leadership, the arts, or any space where empathy is central. Think of a friend who always feels when something isn't right with you, even without you saying anything, or that leader who inspires more through the heart than through strategy. But here too lies the risk. When feelings dominate without balance, they can transform into a persona that seeks to please everyone, nullifying themselves in the name of approval. Shadow work for this type involves learning to say no, recognizing that feeling doesn't mean losing yourself in the other person, and that value also means knowing how to value yourself. The feeling function teaches that life is not measured solely by results, but by meaning. It is the feeling function that connects us to what is beautiful, just, and human, that makes us cry with a song or find hope in a small kindness. But just as thought needs feeling to avoid becoming tyranny, feeling also needs thought to avoid losing itself in illusions. Individuation only occurs when both interact, when reason organizes and the heart gives value. And in Jung's path, after delving into the thinking mind and the feeling heart, we need to descend deeper, to the function that connects us to the body and the concrete world. Sensation. Sensation. Paragraph 1. If thought organizes and feeling gives value, sensation is what brings everything down to earth. For Carl Jung, this function is the channel that connects the ego to the material world, translating the abstract into concrete experience. Those who live predominantly by sensation are like radars of the five senses. They perceive smells, textures, colors, sounds, and details that many ignore. They are the ones who notice the change in tone of someone's voice, the discomfort in a room due to the lighting, or even the texture of food that betrays if something is out of place. Spirituality, when filtered through this, becomes practical. It is not just about thinking or feeling, but about truly living, touching, and experiencing life with presence. In everyday life, this type can excel in professions related to aesthetics, gastronomy, crafts, architecture, or any activity that requires attention to tangible details. Imagine a chef who, with a single spoonful, knows which seasonings are missing, or an artisan who notices minute imperfections that others miss. But there's a danger. Those who fixate too much on sensation can fall into a persona limited to the immediate, unable to see beyond what the eyes capture. Shadow work here requires opening oneself to the invisible, realizing that not everything that exists can be touched, and that the body is a temple, but not the only path to individuation. Sensation reminds us that life isn't just about reasoning or evaluating, but about feeling the wind on our faces, noticing the temperature of the water, and slowly savoring food. It anchors consciousness in the present, distancing us from the illusions of an ego that only chases the future. However, when balanced, this function doesn't just bind us to the tangible, but prepares us to embrace that which transcends logic and the senses, intuition. And it is precisely at this point that Jung opens the door to the invisible, showing that there is a dimension of being that captures what doesn't yet exist, as if the soul had antennae aimed beyond time and space. Intuition. If sensation anchors the being in the present, intuition does exactly the opposite. It launches the ego beyond the present, as if opening a window to the invisible. Carl Jung described intuition as a perception that doesn't depend on the senses, but on something more subtle, almost spirituality in action. It's the function that captures possibilities, future paths, and hidden meanings. Those who have intuition as their guide are often seen as in tune, capable of perceiving archetypes and patterns that escape others. They're the kind of people who sense an opportunity before it arises, or sense that a relationship is nearing its end without any concrete proof. To some, it seems like magic. To Jung, it was simply another way for the psyche to relate to the world. In practical life, intuitives often shine in creative, innovative, and strategic areas. They are visionaries, those who see beyond the curve, like entrepreneurs who spot a trend before it becomes fashionable, or artists who transform internal symbols into works that touch the collective unconscious. But this same strength can become a trap when unbalanced. Intuition can become an escape, an illusion, or a disconnect from reality. Shadow work is essential here. Intuitives need to learn to check their perceptions, anchor their visions in concrete terms, and avoid confusing insights with absolute truths. A practical exercise? Write down each intuition and then verify what actually came true. Transforming feeling into conscious learning. Intuition is like a whisper from the soul, an invitation to follow paths not yet taken. It expresses itself in dreams, symbols, synchronicities, signals the unconscious sends to guide the process of individuation. Those who rely solely on their senses might call this delusional, but Jung reminded us that the psyche is not limited to the visible. In the balance of functions, intuition offers the ego not only glimpses of the future, but also the call of the self, that greater center that pushes us beyond the persona. However, when different functions collide, thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition, conflicts between types become inevitable. And it is in this clash that both crises and major transformations often arise. Conflicts between types. When Carl Jung described psychological types, he wasn't creating boxes to label people. He was showing that each function sees the world through different lenses. And like every lens, each distorts and reveals at the same time. Now imagine what happens when two people with completely opposite lenses have to coexist. One who lives by logical thought and the other who acts by deep feeling. It's as if a Swiss engineer and an Andalusian poet had to solve a puzzle blindfolded, each swearing their piece is the right one. Each type's ego believes its way of perceiving the world is the most lucid, but the spirituality behind the process shows that the conflict is, in fact, a mirror. These clashes don't just happen between people, they also occur within the psyche itself. The ego, for example, may be guided by intuition, but have an inferior thinking function, generating an internal conflict between feeling something is right and needing to justify it with logic. It's the typical dilemma of someone who says, I know I should follow this path, but I can't explain why. Shadow work becomes vital in these cases because it forces the person to confront their inferior functions, those they've rejected or underdeveloped. In practice, it's like teaching an intuitive artist to create spreadsheets or having a rational lawyer write a poem about childhood. It seems impossible, but it's precisely this movement that expands consciousness. In the real world, these conflicts appear in couples who live loving and estranging each other, in teams that can't align because one values efficiency and the other harmony, or even in personal decisions where the soul pulls one way and reason another. Carl Jung believed that it is in this friction between functions that individuation begins to take shape. Because when thought listens to feeling and sensation learns from intuition, something new is born, something neither could create alone. But to do so, it's necessary to face the side the ego fears most, the shadow of one's own kind. And that's where the dive deepens, revealing the parts we most hide of ourselves. The shadow of your kind. Carl Jung said that the more a person identifies with their type, the more the shadow of that same type grows in the subterranean psyche. It's as if every talent comes with a hidden risk. The thinker, for example, may be brilliant in logic, but their shadow is the coldness that dismisses feelings as weakness. The sentimental, so connected to human value, can fall into the trap of emotional dependence and affective manipulation. The sensorial, master of the present, can become trapped in the immediate, ignoring the signs of the invisible. The intuitive, who sees the future, can live lost in daydreams without touching reality. The ego loves to deny these shadows, dressing up in the persona of virtue. But it is through shadow work that the individual discovers that what they deny in others is precisely what they fear in themselves. It's common for the shadow to reveal itself when we least expect it. The extrovert who always boasts of being sociable may discover in solitude an almost unbearable anguish, as if their very presence were unbearable without an audience. The introvert, proud of their depth, may hide a secret resentment against the world, judging others as shallow only to avoid facing their own difficulty in opening up. These examples show that the shadow never appears as we want, but as we need. Spirituality invites us to look at it like a mirror. What bothers others is often a direct message from the collective unconscious pointing to our own wound. Shadow work is painful because it requires descending into the depths where we store what we believe to be unacceptable. It is in this space that anger, envy, vanity, and even the vulnerability that the ego so rejects lurk. But Jung reminded us, the gold of individuation is mixed with the mud of the shadow. The spiritual journey does not require the shadow to be destroyed, but rather integrated, transformed into a creative force. Those who dare this delve discover that what seemed like weakness was power in disguise. And after going through this confrontation, the inevitable question arises. After all, what is the path that leads the ego, the persona, and the shadow to the self? Jung called this individuation the path of individuation. Carl Jung described individuation as life's most important journey, becoming who you truly are. But it's not an unattainable ideal or an abstract concept. It's a daily, almost artisanal process. The first practical step is simple yet profound. Observing yourself. Asking yourself, what am I feeling right now? Is this my choice? Or is it just the persona trying to please someone? This kind of self-inquiry begins to dissolve the layers of the ego and reveal the archetypes that drive our story. A practical way to apply this is to keep a journal recording dreams, emotions, and everyday reactions. Jung highly valued this exercise because the unconscious speaks in symbols, and the journal is a bridge between the hidden shadow and consciousness. Another essential step on the path to individuation is shadow work, which can begin with small steps. For example, when something or someone causes disproportionate irritation, instead of blaming the other, ask yourself, what does this reveal about me? This practice transforms ordinary situations into opportunities for self-discovery. If you feel envy, ask yourself what hidden desire is being projected. If you feel anger, perhaps there's a legitimate need to set boundaries. In practice, this means using everyday conflicts as mirrors. A colleague who irritates you at work can be the trigger for realizing a part of your shadow that hasn't yet been integrated. Thus, individuation ceases to be a philosophical concept and becomes a living exercise applied to relationships, choices, and even silence. But individuation isn't just confrontation, it's also creation. It's about integrating psychic functions, making room for thought, feeling, sensation, and intuition to communicate with each other. This can be practiced concretely. Someone very rational might dedicate time to a creative activity, such as painting or music. Someone intuitive might play sports or garden to ground themselves in the present. Small daily rituals help balance the psyche. Meditating, walking in silence, studying topics that expand consciousness. The idea is simple: to step out of the persona's autopilot and give voice to the self, which has always been there but muffled. And when the individual begins to recognize themselves in this process, a natural question arises: after all, what lies behind all this? What, in essence, defines us? Discover your essence. Discovering your own essence, in Carl Jung's view, doesn't mean donning a new mask, but rather peeling back layers of the persona imposed by family, culture, and even your own ego in search of acceptance. A practical step to begin is to list which behaviors you maintain simply to please others. Ask yourself, if no one were watching, would I still do this? This simple exercise reveals which parts are true and which merely belong to social role. Another valuable practice is to revisit childhood memories and identify what enchanted you before the world taught you to be useful or productive. Often, your essence hides in these small glimpses, in forgotten hobbies, in natural curiosities, and in the archetypes that have always inhabited your dreams. In everyday life, applying this process requires courage to defy external expectations. If you find yourself always acting like the responsible one in the group, perhaps your essence wants to experience more lightheartedness and even a bit of spontaneity. If you've always been seen as the funny one, perhaps you need to give voice to the serious side that's never been given space. A practical way to explore this is to choose a small, concrete action that goes against the pattern repeated by your persona. It could be something as simple as saying no to an invitation, starting a course no one expects you to take, or setting aside time for silence. These actions, though seemingly small, signal to the unconscious that you're willing to reclaim your authentic self. The essence also reveals itself when we learn to integrate shadow and light, ego and self, instead of rejecting parts of ourselves. This can be done through spiritual practices, such as meditation or prayer, but also through practical actions, writing letters to yourself, talking to someone you trust about hidden aspects, or even seeking Jungian therapy. The key is to transform self-knowledge into daily action. Ask yourself, does this decision bring me closer to or further away from who I truly am? When these questions begin to guide choices, the essence ceases to be a mystery and becomes a guiding light. And this is precisely why Jung stated, understanding one's own nature is not the end, but the beginning of a journey, an invitation to embrace what has always been within you. Now that you've explored this personality map with Carl Jung as your guide, the question remains, what will you do with this knowledge? It's no use simply understanding your ego, your persona, your archetypes, or even dabbling in shadow work if it doesn't become a daily practice. So look at yourself. What patterns do you repeat without realizing it? What parts of you have been silenced to fit the mask the world has demanded? And what's more, if you've discovered your type, do you have the courage to look at its shadow? Individuation isn't just a nice speech, it's action. It's the decision to integrate, to embrace yourself completely, even when it's uncomfortable. So I challenge you, are you willing to stop living on autopilot and embrace the essence that's been calling you for so long? Because in the end, only you can walk through that door. If this content resonated with you, if it awakened something deep inside, apply it right now. Try the exercises, ask your questions, write down your dreams, test your limits. And tell me, which part of this dive challenged you the most? Write in the comments. Sometimes the simple act of putting it into words is the first step toward your transformation. Oh, and don't forget, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here you'll continue receiving not only knowledge, but also invitations to the most important journey of your life, discovering who you truly are.